Okay, so next up we have Veronica and Maria from Stratosphere Research, and they're going to be talking about Machete cyber operations in Latin America. So off you go.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for being here on Friday. We are going to present a study of Machete cyber operations in Latin America. And before we start, a little bit about ourselves. I'm Veronica. I'm working at the Czech Technical University in Prague. I'm currently leading a project that is called Civil Sphere, in which we provide free services to journalists, activists, human rights defenders, and NGOs to protect them against digital threats, digital attacks. And I'm also leading the Stratosphere as a group, the research laboratory, and where Maria also works.
Hello, thank you for being here. My name is Maria Rigaki, and I'm currently a PhD student at the Czech Technical University. I work in the Stratosphere lab as well, and my main topics are machine learning applications in security.
Yeah. And we did this research with two of our colleagues, Kamila Babayeva. She's our youngest researcher in the laboratory with only 19 years old. She helped us a lot. She's doing computer science. And we also collaborated, and Sebastian Garcia, he's the director of the Stratosphere laboratory, and he was also part of this research. So we are going to have a lot of topics to cover. We will start with some timeline of the research to kind of orient everyone, research methodology, and then the rest of the part of the talk we will cover some interesting things that we found. However, it's just 25 minutes, half an hour, so we are not covering everything. So please take a look at our paper and ask us any questions afterwards. So the timeline of the research is mostly to guide us what are we covering. But before we start, what is exactly Machete? So Machete is right now a Python tool, which is modular, used for cyber espionage. But some people talk about Machete as the group. We, in this paper and in this talk, we refer to Machete as a tool, which is operated by a group, which right now we consider it has no name. And you can also find it in some antivirus detections as RAWA. So for us, for the rest of the talk, every time we say Machete, we refer as the tool. And this research started actually back in 2017 by malware hunter team. He tweeted that he found a malware with some decoy that was written in Spanish. And I was getting to the conversation for helping translating the document. And the community quickly found that it was Machete. But for me, it was so interesting because I'm from Argentina. So it was like, what? We have APTs over there? It was kind of cool. So we started looking into this, and we found that by the time there were two main reports on that. The first one was by Kaspersky Gray team. They published about Machete in 2014, in which they detail all the functionality that most of that is valid until now. And then a few months before this tweet from malware hunter team, Silence also published a research updating that the malware was still active and that has like 800 active infected users and so on. But between these two blogs and afterwards, there was kind of nothing. So we started looking into that because it was kind of interesting and it was a nice first APT to research. 2 months ago, ESET published a technical report on the activities of Machete from 2018 to 2019. In this research, we are not covering any part of this. We couldn't see that. So, but please go take a look. So, with these two blogs, that was basically all the information that we have available. So we wanted to answer some questions that were not there, right? So one of them was, is this actor still active? Like, is still operating? By the work of Silence, we assume it was, but it was not very clear. We also wanted to know if this was a group, or if it was just an individual. Like the tool, the Machete tool is not really sophisticated, so we wanted to answer this question. And we also wanted to answer if Machete was actively being developed or it was just one thing that was developed back in 2014 and then just used over and over again. And finally, there was information about the targets, but we wanted to answer these questions of who are the targets looking only at the malware, because we don't have an antivirus with victims' data, and we didn't have any other way to actually know about the targets. So we set to answer these questions in our research. And this research wouldn't have been possible without the collaboration during the past 3 years of all these people. Special thanks to Roski, which was my ex-colleague, and investigated with him the first part. Also Jacob, Reversing Labs, Luciano Martins, that is over there, Jonathan and Dimitri, also because they contributed with samples and other information that we use for this. And I will give it to Maria so she can start the methodology.
So when we started working, of course, we wanted to answer these questions, but it's important to do it with some sort of methodology that allows, first of all, other people to check our work. So reproducibility is very important. And I think not only in academia, but in general, we should strive for that, all of us. And also, we want to make the research as comprehensive as possible. We want to gather as many samples as we can. And so we started, of course, by reversing the first samples that we had. And this allows us to actually find more information and then gather even more. So that was kind of a cycle. From this information that we extracted, we analyze it, and this fed up to more samples and more samples. I think if we keep looking, we might even find more. But this kind of thing we're doing continuously over the past years, I would say. So one of the first steps of this analysis was actually the reversing process. So Machete is it's a multi-stage, let's say, malware. So first, the user, the victim, will receive like a zip or a RAR file that contains, when you open it, it contains a decoy file, usually a PDF or a Word that they're interested, but this will also drop an executable file. So on the second stage, we have these two. The executable, of course, is not detected by the user, but this is what we analyze. And we saw that it's a Python-based compiled malware compiled with Py2exe. So this can be, of course, decompiled, and then the PIC files can be uncompiled with uncompiled tool and get some source code. From this source code, we can start looking at different information and create strings or YARA rules that allow us to search in the different public or private repositories. And a summary of the numbers to give you an idea. So Machete, the first sample we have is from 2010. And up to now, we have seen 176 different campaigns. On the stage 1, we have seen 116 distinct, unique stage 1 modules, 155 stage 2 modules. On the decoy documents, 93 distinct ones. And in total, 342 unique modules. So what can we learn initially? What can the information, the data, the modules we have, and the code and the different files tell us? One of the information pieces that we extracted was the last modified date. So on the stage 2 modules, the Python modules, we got the last modified date in order to construct a timeline. But apart from the modules, the executable contained a number of configuration files. Veronica will tell you more about the details on those because they had very interesting information about exfiltration routes, how they store things on their FTP servers, versioning of the software, campaigns. And inside the code, you could see also information about the command control servers, credentials for them, but also encryption keys that were used to encrypt the victim's data. From all these pieces that we're trying to put together of the puzzle the last few years, we conclude that Machete has several operational phases. We have found this, at least we categorize this in these 5 ones. First of all, of course, the delivery part, then installation of the victim's computer, the different actions, how it moves laterally within an organization, and exfiltration. And I will say a few words about each of them. So the main kind of way that it spreads is, of course, spearfishing. We see mainly URLs and attachments. Other researchers have talked about web injections. But we also saw something that was not reported until now, that they also use USBs, USB sticks to infect and move laterally within the organization. So what does it do, right? These are the different modules, the different actions that do the different functionalities. Not all samples contain all modules. So some samples contain some of them, then at some point some modules disappear, some functionality, then it reappears. So it seems that the way they created it is they can take on and off functions, or the way they operate allows them to do so. So we see that, of course, they're taking information about the system, key logging, they can take screenshots, and they do that on a periodic manner, every, I don't know how many screenshots per hour. A few samples had geolocation information, so they were trying to use the Google API to find where the victim is actually located, and audio recordings and so on. And finally, the lateral movement, I mentioned a little bit. So what we found is that some samples contain functionality that checks if a USB drive is inserted. Then, if it is, it copies itself over there and hopes that another user will open it and see the decoy document, it will click, and it will try to jump through the organization this way. And finally, the exfiltration. The vast majority of the samples use FTP. We have seen some of them that use Dropbox APIs to store the data of the user, but we also saw that it does exfiltration through USB. And what it does again, it detects that the USB drive is there. It looks for a specific file, a marker. If the marker is there, it copies the data from the user to the USB. And this is important because it assumes that maybe they have access, physical access to the victim's machine, right? In order to do that. So we have a bunch of data. We'll start a little bit with the analysis. I will talk you through a little bit about the infrastructure, the keys, and the versions. We said that we have seen samples from 2010, so the past 8-9 years. We've seen only 31 command control servers. That means that they don't change infrastructure, they don't move so much. Other actors move a lot more. Maybe they don't have a lot of pressure. We don't know why, of course. We see for these 30 servers, 18 distinct users and 20 passwords. That means that they reuse passwords and users. They don't always change, and they don't have unique user per server necessarily. And we saw that they used only 6 AES keys to encrypt the data throughout the... I think the encryption started in 2011, so for the past 8 years, they only used 6 different keys that have very similar structure. They are the same length, they have special characters at the same places. It's like they're using the same recipe. So this means like kind of one group operating and reusing a lot of this infrastructure. And finally, there was also a text file, a configuration file that was called version.txt in some of the samples. And you can see these versions that they are kind of not continuous. Some of them are a bit close, 2, 3, 4, but then they jump to 13, then we have 20s, 39, 84. So this might be an indication of versioning of the software, but it also might mean that different subgroups have different versionings, or we don't know exactly what it means. In correlation with other data, it's kind of interesting to see how it's used in different campaigns, but on its own, it doesn't really tell us kind of a lot of things. Yeah, this information you already have. And I will pass on to Veronica for the rest of the analysis and some interesting bits and pieces.
Yeah, so I will ask you not to, hello. I will ask you for this part not to tweet anything, not to take pictures, please, because it's kind of sensitive and taken out of context is not good. So we are going to show some of the interesting leaks and mistakes we think the actors did that brought us interesting information, and yeah, let's go. So around when this started, as Maria said, it has a key login module, it maps the keys, etc. But around 2013, this was changed, and they introduced a little mistake. Instead of putting shift left and right, they put shift F, and this is apart from funny. This was kept and unmodified during the last 6 years. So this was also showing us that Machete, while there were some things changing, there were some others that just remain untouched for all this time. So in terms of exfiltration, every document gathered from the machine is encrypted and then exfiltrated to some folder. The folder is constructed by the MAC address and the name of the machine of the user. But there is also another configuration file in the Machete bundle that is called routes, and all the people infected from that specific Machete campaign will have their data exfiltrated to that specific FTP folder. Yeah? So the data from the users will be in a user folder, also in a FTP specific folder. And we start looking at these routes, and they have interesting names like Amazona, Buenaventura, Guajira, Armenia, and others like Ganaderos and SIS and stuff. So for a long time, like we were kind of trying to understand this, what does it mean, and we couldn't figure it out, mostly because Armenia, it didn't make any sense in the Latin American country. But then it occurs to us to start looking at the actual map of Latin America, and we map a lot of the names map with cities or departments of Colombia. So this does not mean that this is from Colombia. There are several, this can be a false flag. That's why please do not tweet about this. But it was too much a coincidence to kind of, the correlation was very high. So, or there are two hypotheses here. Like one of them is like the people targeted are from these specific regions. However, as we saw from previous reports, the target population is all across Latin America and even outside Latin America. And the other hypothesis is that maybe these places are information processing centers where all the information that is being exfiltrated is analyzed. However, there is no information that will help us confirm either of the hypotheses. So having this in mind, we keep looking into the data, and another interesting file in Machete is the caso.txt, which is like case, which has the campaign purpose. So in the last 6 years, this file does not contain any interesting things, like there are words that do not make sense, but in the past, they made some mistakes and they put more information. In this case, the text in Spanish translates to something like ELN Occidental War Front against Pedro II, head of the Ernesto Che Guevara Front. And we might think that, oh, the ELN is against this man, but the Ernesto Che Guevara Front and the ELN Occidental War Front are kind of the same kind of group. So it's not that, we cannot say from this that they are behind this, right? So, but it was interesting because it gave us like a specific context that we can start looking information from. And we started interested about this Pedro, who was he? And we found an article of 6 months later after this campaign in which the Air Force of Colombia bombarded a camp where this man was killed. So we cannot correlate these two things, like the cyber espionage and the bombarding. Of course, we cannot say that, but this shows us that this Pedro that appeared in the file, it was a real person, and the espionage campaign was like a real thing, right? So this was kind of interesting. And there were other campaigns that were disclosing by mistake some specific email addresses and more detailed stuff about Machete and their interests. So looking at this, we started to say, like, okay, what can we learn about the targets without having infections of people and statistics that other antivirus can have? So we did an analysis of all the decoy documents, and we read through them. I can understand Spanish, so I spent a lot of time going over them and trying to take notes, saying, like, okay, what is the topic of this document? And in most of the documents were having, like, mentioning some specific country, so we were annotating the topic and the country. And most of the topics fall into political and military interests, and the most mentioned countries are Venezuela, Nicaragua, Ecuador, and Colombia. And there were also documents that were more universal, like the art of war and some naked ladies, and that always work as phishing. So in summary, for this part, is like we confirm that, yeah, the intent of the decoy documents was military and political in nature. While the most documents were written in Spanish, we also found documents written in Portuguese, which previous reports maybe guessed that Brazil was not included in the target population, but this could prove it wrong. And then the decoy documents were mostly PowerPoint words, things that people is very used to clicking on, right, opening. And to start concluding, we wanted to show, we wanted to show a little of Machete evolution, because we have all these like 10 years, almost 10 years of samples, so we start looking into it. As Maria said, we have the last modified date, so we took that. Of course, it can be modified, right? But we took that as an initial way of sorting all the campaigns, and then we start seeing if this date makes sense or not. So we realized that they haven't changed it. So this is a small highlight of the important things. The first Machete sample was in December 22 of 2010, and Machete had just one module. And this is so interesting because all the Machete in the last 6 years is modular all the time. But at the beginning, it was just that. A few months later, they added a decoy, and then they start modularizing. By May of 2011, they have a fully modular Machete with 5 modules. In 2011, in September, they introduced encryption, but remember that the Kaspersky report was in 2014. So the introduction of encryption was just like their invention or their proactiveness, so it was very good. And in 2015, they start obfuscating the Python code, maybe as a reaction that people start looking into them. The first Dropbox samples were in 2017, and then the next biggest refactoring of the Machete code occurred last year, around April, in which they reduced the number of modules to 3. They started to add a compression step, so you need to take one more step to actually see the code. The obfuscation is still there, and now the credentials, before they were kind of obfuscated, and now they are encrypted. So to conclude, Machete is still like an active threat in Latin America. It doesn't matter if it's sophisticated or not sophisticated. The people there is still infected. And while this area has been heavily under-researched, we think it should not be the only thing happening there. So we would like this region to get more attention. Machete has evolved continuously, almost undisturbed. And we think that it's actually a group behind Machete with a lot of resources. Maria was saying that it was taking a screenshot. It's taking like 300, 400 screenshots per day. In a week, it's like thousands, and there's just one person. So if you want to have actionable activities on this information, there needs to be a lot of people actually reading through the screenshots and the documents and actually using them, right? And we think that the sophistication of the APTs actually is strictly correlated with the socioeconomics of the country. In Latin America, having a Python with a spearfishing, it works. Most of the antivirus, people is not paying, and sometimes they disable them. So even if they are good detections of this threat, they just keep people getting infected. So thank you. And I don't know if we have time for questions.